Welcome to Oh the Humanities, a podcast produced by the University of New England Center for Global Humanities. Our conversations are devoted to shining a light on the important work being done in the humanities at UNE and other colleges across the U.S. and around the world. My name is Josh Pahigian, and I'm your host. My guest today is filmmaker David Washburn, who joins me in studio at the University of New England's Portland campus for the health sciences. David holds a Master of Fine Arts degree in cinema from San Francisco State University and a bachelor's degree in history from UC Berkeley. His documentary films treating the American Muslim experience have aired extensively on PBS and have earned him countless awards. David's most recent film, Three Chaplains, turns his lens toward one of America's most powerful institutions, the American military. It tells the interconnected stories of three chaplains fighting for equality and religious freedom despite the stereotypes, discrimination, and other challenges they face. We'll talk about this powerful film shortly. But first, let's meet our guest. David, welcome to Oh the Humanities.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. I've thought maybe we get started by giving our listeners a little background on just who you are and how you found your path. And I know especially for our students who listen to the podcast often, that sort of reflection is sometimes valuable because they're trying to find their own way in the world and find their professional niche in the world. So let me ask you, when did you realize you wanted to be a filmmaker?
Oof, that's a tough question because there is no direct line between, me being a filmmaker and some kind of inciting event or, moment of imagination or filmmaker mentorship. I like that this is a humanities podcast. I very much come from a kind of humanities background in many ways. I studied history, was my first kind of academic passion. And through history, well, here you go, Josh, I'll give it to you. Through history, let me back up here. I had a difficult time as a child in school. I have ADHD. I was really one of those kids just looking out the window, could not sit still. Found the structure of a enclosed classroom very difficult. I did not do well grade wise in junior high school. I struggled, but in California, where I hail from, there is this junior college, community college system that was created by Clark Kerr and others to provide a kind of an access point first for students who achieved, but also those who were struggling, and I took advantage of that. I went to junior college, community college, and city college. I went to 3 different spots, eventually finishing up at Sacramento City College, where I got all these history credits. From there, you transfer. So I transferred into UC Berkeley, which many of students here know. Getting into UC Berkeley is very difficult out the gate. I got into UC Berkeley to study history. My father was very much into history. My grandfather was very much into history, his father. And so it's something I pursued. Along the way, Professor Richard Candida Smith offered a course in oral history. And I was intrigued to think about how we can learn history from those who lived it, a kind of this idea of bottom-up history, right? Versus the kind of top-down, storytelling. And he encouraged us to go out and find storytellers who we could interview to kind of engage in this kind of work. And so that was extremely influential for me to think about how I could go out and find these stories, collaborate with storytellers to kind of unlock some of these really interesting stories that, on a variety of topics. The one that I got engaged in at the time was around the World War II era. And near UC Berkeley, there's a shipyard, similar to here in South Portland, where there was a shipyard. There's a much bigger shipyard, the Kaiser Shipyards. And I started interviewing former shipyard workers. And we were videotaping these interviews. So that is a long way of getting to your question, how did I get into filmmaking? I backdoored through oral history. We started videotaping. And then from there, I said, there's more to video than just an uncut 2-hour interview like you can actually edit. And I started engaging in editing those videos. And then from there, this idea of, well, now I can go out and potentially, make more than just these oral history videos and make documentary films. So that was the long way of answering your question. Mm-hmm.
When I asked the question, I expected you to say, oh, as a child, I was running around with a camcorder all the time, documenting things, but it wasn't that at all. And I love the sort of serendipitous way that it seems like you found the path you were meant for, but it wasn't laid out for you in that easy linear path. You kind of had to find that way. How did, if you had been a different major other than a history major, how would your perspective be different, and would you be able to make? I'm assuming you wouldn't be able to make the types of films you did. How did the lenses of the historian contribute to your developing mindset, the subject matter you chose, and the talent you have as a filmmaker?
Well, all of my films I've done, I guess you could say, trace back to that concept of bottom-up history or bottom-up storytelling. I haven't made films in which I'm interviewing, leaders or, these influential stakeholders in some critical issue. I haven't made those kind of films. All of my films have been folks who are kind of on the ground, grinding it out, working on making change, on improving their lives, on helping others, on this kind of storytelling versus somebody who's making decisions that affect people below them, So that it all traces back to that, where I find it really fascinating to work with folks who haven't really told their story before. Like I think, probably 90% of the people I've worked with have never shared their story on camera before. So it's an exploration in that way. It's collaborative in that way, which is great, versus, just training your lens on someone who's, told their story 10 or 15 times. They're giving you kind of a baked answer. You're kind of like, why am I here? I enjoy the kind of the investigation, the exploration, the collaboration that my filmmaking, brings me into with these storytellers.
So you have the power as a filmmaker to shape an audience's understanding of a topic, but I also hear you saying that when you're putting the microphone and the camera on someone who maybe hasn't told their story before, you're also empowering them in a way that they haven't been before, that they're having a chance to tell their story, to realize that someone cares to hear their story. And I would think that must be incredibly rewarding to give people a voice in a way that at least media hasn't given to them previously to reach people.
Yeah, and in some ways it's kind of a bit of it's a courageous act to share your story in that way. It's very vulnerable. We're not just doing, oftentimes people don't come into these interviews knowing what they're going to say. They've never told their story before, so it's very courageous. It's transgressive in a way because, people are stepping outside of, let's say, their role as a, in the case of one of my films, the role of a farmer who's tending to his peach orchard, but now he's speaking, potentially on national television about his life and his spiritual life, his life as a community member. That's transgressive because this, in many people, we assume a certain role in our community, and we don't see ourselves as, I'm speaking on behalf of this grand issue, and people have it in them, obviously, but I think that act is courageous, is transgressive, and it's kind of fun being part of seeing somebody kind of step into that. And oftentimes, after films air and there's a lot of uncertainty, like what's going to happen with this project, what's going to happen with my story. I don't understand this whole system, and I try to let people know what's going to happen. But oftentimes people come back and say, I've just received so much great feedback. The story of a Muslim community leader who he in his day job is he tends a gas station, a convenience store, and people coming and say, I saw you on television. Thanks for sharing your story. Very reaffirming for the that act of courage. that it takes to step in front of a camera and say things that, often people are having in their minds. They're not sharing with others. Part of the, the interview process is to draw out some of those emotions, some of those fears, some of those desires, those hopes that kind of we keep internal, but we're not necessarily sharing. Particularly this guy who's, runs a gas station. He's just saying hello, making a nice chit chat, being polite. And now on camera and on TV, now people are seeing him share something that is, a bit more forceful in his opinions and his emotions. And now they see that, and I'm like, wow, it's a risky thing to do for people. And so I love kind of being part of that, seeing that process play out, and also seeing the reward that the storytellers get on the other side.
It sounds like it would be really rewarding to play that role for someone else. We'll get to Three Chaplains eventually, I promise. But I want to talk a little bit about one of your earlier films, also dealing with the Muslim community. A film you produced titled An American Mosque, which was broadcast on PBS nationwide and later ran on Al Jazeera. The Southern Poverty Law Center praised it, writing, "An American Mosque beautifully demonstrates the story of triumph, hope, and activism that followed a painful act of religious intolerism." And the film was selected as part of the U.S. State Department's Film Diplomacy Program, American Film Showcase. In the years since, it's been honored with awards from major Muslim civil liberty groups and others. What story does that film tell?
Well, so that was referring to this one farmer and shopkeeper that I was talking about. In 1994, a mosque was burned down in rural California. It's this farmer. His name is Khalid Saeed. He's of Pakistani descent. He decided to give 5 acres of his farm to the community to build I think a 12,000 square foot mosque. So it's a small, large mosque. Right as it was starting to be used by the community, just before it was going to open, it was burned down. FBI investigated, determined it was a hate crime, looked into who did it, had some suspects, but never could convict someone of the crime. That film, traces the origin of the mosque, why this community decided to kind of live out their values publicly, be part of the religious community in a more formal way in this town, and yet they were faced with, this intolerance, this hatred. And how did they respond? Who else in the community responded and reached out to help? And that was a beautiful thing. There were, quite a few other religious communities who decided to say, hey, we stand with you. We're going to help donate money. We're going to help you rebuild in any way you can. They ended up rebuilding the mosque. So it was ultimately, a positive story in that sense. But really, this was 1994. Outside of the community, this story was not largely known. In some Muslim press, it was printed and shared, but people it just was kind of lost in the public consciousness. Even in this town, people are like, yeah, that something happened out there. We don't know who could have been. There was actually like a Sikh temple just down the road on this road, because there's the community there is of Punjabi descent. So in Punjab, there's Sikhs and Muslims, and so there was on the same road there's a large Sikh temple, and so people, it could have been the Sikhs. That it was like a whole sense of rumor, right? And also in a adjacent way, a kind of sense of intolerance, like, those people don't get along, when that wasn't at all the case. And so for me, it was a bit of a challenge to not only tell this story in a post 9/11 environment where we're dealing with Islamophobia, we're dealing with a largely misunderstanding of who Muslims are, and to kind of in a way combat that, but also to fill this void in this community of like, well, what actually happened, and how do we kind of retell this story, share this story on a broader sense, so the community understands their own history. And so that was a big motivating factor for me. At the same time, I'm of Jewish descent. The synagogue that I attended as a boy was firebombed in Sacramento in 1999. White supremacists came into Sacramento and firebombed 3 synagogues in one night. B'nai Israel, the oldest synagogue west of the Mississippi, still in operation, was its library was destroyed. That event generated tremendous public support for the Jewish community to combat this anti-Semitism, and there was a huge public rally, people putting signs in their window, essentially not in our town, we stand with the Jewish community, and the Jewish community felt very supported in that moment. And the public consciousness, the public imagination of this event was cemented. It was very strong in Sacramento. In contrast, in Yuba City, the story had not been told. So there's a bit of a kind of bridge building there for me to see, this is 2 communities facing hatred, facing intolerance. How do we both support one another? And so that filmmaking project, in its own way, it doesn't make it in the film, but its own way, was a way to kind of reach out to the Muslim community and say, hey, you have Jewish brothers and sisters who have undergone this as well. We want to help tell your story. And so since in that community in Yuba City, California, where it took place, the film ran on the front page of the paper several times. The library has, had a screening. We had a huge screening at the junior college there where I showed up and I thought there'd be, 10, 15 people. It was 200 people were there. It's run on the PBS station there 7, 8 times. So really a great way of kind of sharing, overcoming a shared experience, and ultimately, climaxing with a screening of the film inside the synagogue at B'nai Israel, where that firebombing happened, where we took the film and did a interfaith event there to tell the Muslim story inside the synagogue for the Jewish community and others who attended, and so that was ultimately a beautiful thing.
That's a really tremendous story. It must make you feel good to be using your skills to not only create art, but create something that makes the world a better place for those people who I'm sure felt so much validation and love from the community to get that sort of attention the film brought. Amazing. Let's talk a little bit now about Three Chaplains, which I believe re-aired on PBS most recently in April of 2025. I enjoyed the film tremendously. I found it very moving. I really admire the way you weave together the stories of the different chaplains the film follows, and I'm really looking forward to sharing it with our CGH, Center for Global Humanities community here on the UNE campus this fall. Rather than have me try to tell the story of the film, I'll let you tell our listeners what the larger story you're trying to tell is in following the plight of these chaplains within the U.S. military. What is the film about?
Well, to take one step back, prior to this this feature film, so it's a 55-minute film, I had produced a series of short films on Muslim service in the U.S. military in a post 9/11 environment. And I had, in my film work at SF State, I had gotten involved in doing veteran storytelling. I had read about these wars happening, followed the news, but in my community knew very few, only one person who ever served. So I was very much, in a sense, removed from the folks who were actually experiencing it through military service. And so I was really interested in interviewing veterans to kind of explore and hear their side of things, and that then led me to then take on this project, interviewing and telling stories of Muslim veterans, because here we are post 9/11, this idea that the cliche of Muslims are public enemy number one, it's a cliche, but put it out there, right?
Islamophobia was running high.
Islamophobia very strong,
Absolutely.
Misunderstanding at all-time highs, and yet here we have 5,000 plus Muslims serving in the U.S. military. So what's it like to be perceived in this way while also serving the country and clearly rejecting the stereotype, right? What were the experiences of those men and women? And so I did a couple-year project where I told the stories of these people who served. And among the people I met were chaplains. And this inspired me to think there's a little bit more here, because if, for those people who are listening and who may know people who served in the military, there's some very boring jobs in the military, right? It's like, I don't want to reduce them to day jobs, but there are people who do IT. There are people who are just, they're working on diesel engines, just repairing them, just doing the nuts and bolts stuff. There's logistics people just ordering food and, just filling out spreadsheets to make sure, everything's where it's supposed to be. And so there's a lot of jobs like that. I think statistically, I think it's only about 10% serve in infantry frontline positions. These wars, Iraq and Afghanistan were not kind of frontline wars. So even people driving trucks to fill, with food and gas and things like that were exposed to, frontline risks of IEDs and the like. So, they're not classic infantry. A long way of saying, Josh, that just because you're Muslim and serve in the military doesn't mean you're in a role that is necessarily dramatic or worthy of potentially of filmmaking, right? Because you're like, I'm going to interview so and so who's works in the IT department and they're Muslim and in the military. Well, that's not particularly dramatic. It's just here they are being this person in the military. Why are we trying to make something out of this, right?
And their Muslim identity isn't directly impacting their work as an IT employee.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. In contrast, potentially, like you're infantry, you're on the front line. I've interviewed guys who were, like one guy who was in the Marines, who wasn't going into Fallujah. And here you are, your people and your guys in your unit are actually in direct combat and risk. And so the kind of the emotions behind that are running through that unit are strong. And being a Muslim in that unit, you're running into these strong emotions people are having. Some of them misguided, right? But I mean, just they're there. And in this case of this one Marine, his sergeant, took the unit aside and said, we all know, Adam is a Muslim, right? If you have any problems with that, you have to come to me. So there's drama there. There's good storytelling there because, there's a lot of energy to kind of unpack. Turn to chaplains now. Their Muslim identity is interwoven into their daily job. They are the public face of Islam for the U.S. military. And we can talk about how that all played out. But there's a lot more storytelling energy there. How do they meet the needs of their own faith and the Muslims on base that they're caring for, while also caring for the other really 99% who are not Muslim, but many of them who, as you see in the film, there are people who they're like their first week in the military. They get their head shaved. They're in boot camp. And here's this guy coming in with a kufi, Muslim skull cap, coming up saying, "Hey, I'm a chaplain here, and I'm Muslim." And here are these people. They've many of them who probably have never had any relationship with a meaningful relationship with a Muslim in their life. And here this person is like they're a commander to them. They're supposed to listen to them. They're supposed to be following what they say and learning from them, respecting them. That dynamic is really interesting. It's a lot of it in the film is subtext, but it's clear that for me, once I met chaplains and saw the life that they were living, Muslim chaplains in this case, in the military, I said, there's a lot of storytelling potential there. Let's get at that. And so when you say, what's the film about? It's multifaceted, right? But it's in many ways told very much through a personal lens. Again, we're not interviewing top-down people. Tell me about, the history of chaplaincy in the U.S. military. No, we're just on the ground with these three individuals, seeing how they're the work they're doing, but also the emotions that are coming up for them as they're trying to pursue good, really, is what it comes down to. Pursue good in their daily life, in their spiritual life, in the military.
Well said. For me as a viewer, I could see them providing, as you were just saying, they're providing spiritual counsel to the fellow service people, but they're also playing the role of teacher in a lot of cases, explaining what it means to be Muslim. There was the one scene with one of the chaplains at a whiteboard, like writing down words and defining what's the difference between Islam and Muslim, what's this or that, just to help educate their fellow servicemen and women, many of whom, as you said, have just never really even had interactions with a Muslim person. The film says there are about 3,000 chaplains in the U.S. military, and fewer than 20 of them are Muslim. I think I'm remembering those stats right. I'm wondering, by calling attention to that, has that balance changed at all? And then my other question is, by giving voice to this very slim minority of people who are in this role who are Muslim, did you get feedback from some of the chaplains themselves who felt a greater sense of solidarity, or just knowing that they were part of a community, even if it's a little bit fragmented within the military?
Yeah, I mean, that stat was just to give some sense of, what are we dealing with here? You could say, well, it's such a small number. What's the import of this? You could also say such a small number, outsized role, and that's more how I saw it. And I think that bears out in the chaplains' lives. Several of the chaplains in the film recently, were called to kind of special deployments in advisory roles, because commanders, in certain parts of the world, saw the necessity of having Muslim people who are fluent in Islam, but also culturally competent, to come advise their commanders. So they definitely have an outsized role, and I think there's a subtext there as well, where there have been adversaries that have been on the other side of these conflicts, which have been Muslim, and commanders are not fluent in understanding who they're dealing with and how to better work with people on the ground, locals, allies. And I think some could say, in a cynical sense, well, are they helping out? Are they not doing good by helping out these commanders? I think the chaplains in the film, would report, I walk into a room with people who have a lot of power, and I see a lot of ignorance. And if I can be there to better inform people and to help them make better decisions, this war, which none of them want, hopefully will be prosecuted in a way that is more humane, which is less violent, which is ultimately ends quicker. So in some sense, they see themselves as working to turn down temperatures and ultimately, bring peace, which is what I think even the commanders want, that they're advising.
What's the response to the film been like? Has it changed hearts and minds? Has it helped erase some stereotypes that are harmful to Muslims? Has it been well received by the military?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the community who's watching the film. I mean, I think, very much, for your audience, I'm not Muslim. I should say that. I have some deep ties throughout the community, given the work I've done over the last decade plus. And one of the first screenings we did was at a large, Muslim national gathering, the Islamic Society of North America annual conference. And the room was packed. We expected to show up thinking that this room was going to be, we've told maybe you get 20 people, you'll be lucky. There was it was overflowing. There's 100 plus people there. And the response in the room was very positive. And I think that's why I say it depends on who's watching it. Like, you'll talk to Muslim audiences, and folks have very conflicted feelings at times watching the film. feeling that the U.S. military presence in some of these countries has been, has led to a lot of hardship and destruction for the civilian populations that have been there. I mean, they have like no lost love for the military, for the leaders potentially that are on the other side, but for the just the civilians and people that are there, I think they're a bit more in touch with the hardships and destruction that have come out of these conflicts than your average American, right? Similarly, if we're talking about what's going on in Gaza right now, I think as a whole, the Muslim community in the United States and globally is tracking the destruction and the harm to civilians in a way that Americans aren't. And I would like to think that if Americans of all backgrounds were tracking that in the same way, their sympathies and their desires to end this and bring peace, and especially humanitarian aid, would be so much stronger. And I don't. It's not any sense of people's heart isn't in the right place. I just think that we're not tracking it in the same way. And so the Muslim community response has been, like conflicted emotions. Like they see the people on screen and they think that they make me proud. They understand the courage that it takes to take on these leadership roles in the military. I mean, I think they relate to that from potentially, being Muslim and working in a business and being one of the only Muslims there, and the same courage it takes to take on leadership roles. But then I think at the same time there's a sense of should they be serving, and some of that comes out in the film, and the characters in the film are not blind to these mixed emotions. They get plenty of feedback from Muslim brothers and sisters about what they're doing. That's one audience. The military, the Department of Defense. One of the first screenings we did was inside the Pentagon. We did a screening for senior leaders within the Air Force, Army. There's some Navy chaplain corps and public affairs to see the film. To make the film, I had to get Department of Defense assistance to get on base and permit my presence there. They had zero editorial input into the film, but I wanted to bring it to the Pentagon to engage with stakeholders there, and the response was very positive for that. And I've had the film used by Air Force instructors who are training chaplains who are coming into the Air Force to educate them about the pluralism and the religious diversity that's present in the U.S. military. That here are your colleagues you're going to be working with. Let's learn some of their stories. So that's been positive. And then I think nationally, I don't know. I can't gauge exactly how people are responding to it, but I've received only positive impact. I just emailed with a old Vietnam vet who's also a filmmaker, and his email was very kind. I shared the film with him, and he said, I'm an atheist. I have no religious practice, but your film really touched me, and thank you for sharing it. So it not even on a spiritual level, but he related to it from a level of military service and just good storytelling.
That must make you feel good to get that kind of note. It's a wonderful film that engages us on so many levels, and I really do look forward to sharing it with our audience. Let's switch gears just a little bit with the time we have left and just talk a little bit about how your industry is evolving. I'm not too super aware of the film industry and how it works, so I just have a few questions that, especially what the life of an independent filmmaker is like and the challenges you face. So I thought those might be interesting areas to explore. So first one, a topic I sometimes bring up with our guests. Have you incorporated AI into any part of your creative process? And do you take seriously the claims by certain futurists that AI is eventually going to replace filmmakers, writers, podcasters, and others doing the sort of work you and I do? Is that a worry you have, or if not, why are you not replaceable by some future version of Chat GPT that can compile interviews and tell stories. What's the human part of your work that's hopefully, I'm leading you a little bit with the question, but that's hopefully irreplaceable?
Well, I don't use AI in my work. Friends, let's say a year ago, were like, you don't use Chat GPT? Man, you're going to fall behind if you don't kind of understand what this technology is. So I signed up, not to promote Chat GPT, but signed up and started engaging with it a little bit for proposal drafts, creative feedback. And I found its feedback very, very generic. Sure, passable for some people, but I have very high standards about my writing, and it really was like a not good enough. I found maybe I wasn't interrogating it well enough, or something like that. But in terms of its ideas for how a story could evolve or become interesting, it was very cliche. And so no, I don't. I cancel my subscription. I don't use it. To your larger question, I think at least for documentary filmmakers, we go out in the real world and are interviewing and working with the human subjects, the natural environment, in ways you cannot replicate with AI. And if you're doing a commercial, different thing. I can't. That's kind of above my pay grade to speak to. I don't have any sense, at least for me, that AI is gonna replace documentary filmmakers or filmmaking. It will assist in ways, probably in speeding up some processes. And that's going to go. That's at industries across the board. But I'm not necessarily a tech optimist. On a lot of things. So that's a subject that I would probably could go down in more of a depressing hole with you if we got further into it. But I don't use it.
Okay. I hope that there's a continuing human role for what we do, whether it's the writing I do or podcasting, the filmmaking that you do. Hopefully, those rumors of our impending replacement are overblown, and it sounds like you think they are.
More for documentary filmmaking, I think one of the threats is just a more limited attention span that's happening.
Can you tell the whole story in 5 minutes for YouTube?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, are people even going to watch feature-length films anymore? When we don't have an attention span to watch 10-minute things. So, particularly at home. And I think this is, kind of shifting within the industry, what streamers and others are wanting to fund, because I think, speaking of tech, I think at least, with television, there was some guesswork that would involve, well, what are people interested in? Did they watch the full film? You didn't know at what point they changed the channel, right? Now we have all that data, and the algorithm doesn't lie. They can figure out what people are watching, what they're interested in. Then they get the data points of when they cut out. And so to speak to the industry, all of that is informing, streamers and others, what they want to put on, what they want to put out. And it's tending to be more, true crime, celebrity driven stories, kind of cultish, cult freakish kind of weirdo stuff that kind of just is kind of fascinating from a never seen this before kind of thing. More social issue driven films are getting pushed to the side because, potentially they just see people aren't watching them, and that's a larger. That's not their fault, the streamers, but they could potentially be promoting them stronger, but it's also just here's the data. What do you want to do about it?
So if you're not going to be able to aim for placing your work in different streaming services, what does that leave as sort of the pinnacle venue? Is PBS the best platform? to reach the type of audience that's willing to sit down and engage with a topic for an hour. And in this, you've been doing this a long time, and as you have the political climate changes, right now the political climate seems less than favorable to PBS. We've heard calls for PBS to lose federal funding.
No, it already did lose its federal funding.
Yes. So how is that impacting your work?
The Three Chaplains film was funded through a lot of money through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and so there are mechanisms for organizations to be redistributing that through film grants, and that's going to be going away. I had a friend who lost an NEH grant, National Endowment for the Humanities grant, to make a film. So it just increasingly those were there were funding sources that independent filmmakers would rely on. And still, those things were let's be honest, those funding sources were very out of reach for your aspiring filmmaker. When I started out, it would be a dream to get some of those things. I had to work quite hard to get to a point where I felt I was competitive enough to secure some of that funding. It's stories to unknown at this point. What's going to happen? I hope philanthropies step up and
foundations
fill some of that. We could look back and say that was between the streamers stepping back from some of the more independent filmmaking, social issue driven films, some of the public government money drying up. We could look back to this as a kind of turning point for independent documentaries at this point. And there was a golden age of jazz, so to speak, being a jazz fan, and taste changed.
Culture changed.
Taste changed. Yeah. There was less funding, if there weren't musicians able to make a living doing that, there was less creative energy going on, less good music being made. It's still going to go on. And filmmaking is still going to go on. That, Josh, let's be honest, is something that you don't talk about in art school and things like that. The level of independent wealth, or folks who are in this industry or in other art making industries who are relying on spouses to kind of pay the bills.
I was for my first few books, for sure.
There you go. This is like a reality of the creative class, they say, And so for students thinking about, how do I get into this? How do people make a living doing this? It's a very hard way to make a living, very hard. And those people who are out there doing things, I think there's not if you kind of look behind the curtain and saw the finances, you'd see maybe only 20% of what they're bringing in is from their art making. And the other 80% is either a spouse is filling in, independent wealth is filling in. It's kind of one of those unknowns. And that's why, people use the word creative class, because it's increasingly becoming something that's out of reach for folks who are, don't have that. I've taken extreme financial risks doing this. Luckily, I've never fallen off the cliff, but it's something that if people ask how would I replicate what you do, I'd have a very hard time telling them exactly how to go about that without taking a lot of risk. So yeah, filmmaking to circle back, filmmaking will continue because people will have either independent wealth or spouses to kind of lean on, and there will still be some revenue there and funding sources, but there's going to be less jazz musicians to continue the metaphor going on as there were in previous years.
So what are you working on now?
I'm working on two films. I'm working on one film that's kind of continuing in the religious literacy interfaith space, that is tracking a evangelical pastor in West Virginia who is organizing a interfaith concert at his church with the house band that plays, kind of more traditional, Christian rock, quote unquote, a Muslim youth choir from the DC area, which is about an hour and a half away, and a Jewish group from a synagogue there. They're all going to come together and perform a concert at his church. That's the kind of the skeleton of the film. The real meat of it are these really interesting characters who are involved in making this happen. What are their backstories? What are their motivations? Why do they want to do this work? Why are they spending their time and their energy doing this? And what can we kind of learn from their challenges, and how can we be inspired by their dreams as well? That's one.
That's your job as filmmaker, to unpeel those onions and find those inspirational stories within. What's the other one you're working on?
The other one is about in 1985. It's a historical science documentary. In 1985, a humpback whale entered the San Francisco Bay, and scientists, who were monitoring the whale, presumed it would just turn around, as sometimes the whales do. Come in, they feed, they leave. This whale had other ideas and started swimming into the Sacramento River Delta, which is a maze of arteries that as part of the Sacramento River, that once it meets the bay, it kind of turns into this maze. And this whale found its way deep into this maze and ultimately got stuck behind a bridge. And it's about the team of scientists who tried to free this whale, and all of the public love that the whale got as a result of kind of being going on its wayward journey. It's Humphrey the whale. Some people may remember that story. So it's a really fun science story and a way to unpack, the history of this effort, but also the adjacent issues of conservation, of the marine ecosystem and change over time, history of whaling, which audiences in this area know is impactful for the industry along the coast of New England for many decades. And so, more of a fun science film, less dealing with people, more dealing with cetaceans.
So you've said fun twice, which makes me think, I don't want to spoil it, but makes me think it has a happy ending and the whale makes its way back to sea.
Yeah.
But
go on Wikipedia. The whale. You can't make a documentary about your main character dying.
I think that's one that our many marine science majors here at UNE will really be interested in. When do you expect those two to be out?
The interfaith documentary, I'm hoping later next year.
Okay.
The Humphrey film is going to take more funding, and that's going to be several years. I mean, these like the Three Chaplains film, from inception to completion to broadcast. I mean, it was. I think I got my first monies in like 2015, and it didn't make it onto public television until 2023. So almost 8 years. So it's a patient. You have to be quite patient to see these projects through. So
patient and talented and visionary and all those other things that go into making an independent filmmaker succeeding to the extent that you do. David, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Josh.
That's it for this episode of Oh the Humanities. As always, thanks for listening, and feel free to tell us what you thought of this conversation on the CGH social media channels: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and X.